Hi everyone, my name is the Honorable Lady Kale O'Connell of the Leafy Green, and this...
I'm Lady Monka McCoran. I help Kale with Youth Commedia. This is my pen that I will twirl.
And welcome to the first ever virtual Youth Commedia class. So, we're going to do things a little bit differently this year for quite obvious reasons. Essentially, we are going to be doing a Zoom call every morning, and then we're going to have a supplemental video, just like this, each day of classes to help reinforce some of the things that we talk about in the Zoom call and that are listed on the layout for the class. So, since this is our first video, what we'd like to go over, first and foremost, pretty obvious, is what Commedia is as a baseline introduction. So, Commedia dell'arte is a form of theater that originated in Renaissance-era Italy.
So that's like 14th century to 16th century, for those of you who don't know time periods, years, mostly looking at the 1400s to the 1600s.
And Commedia did continue past that point, but it took a little bit of a turn. So we're going to focus mostly on the specific time frame in the Renaissance when it was originated. It began mostly as a form of street theater until it gained renown. So a lot of it was bigger motions, bigger sounds, things like that to be able to draw attention. A lot of the scenarios at the time were based on social or political issues of that time frame as well.
And they were mostly just outlines. So because it was improvised theater, really all actors would get was this, like, not even really a piece of paper with the outline on it, but they would just be told, like, this is plot point A, B, and C, and you guys can have fun getting from each one to the next.
Exactly. And that is where the improv skill does come in, exactly. It's maybe a few lines about what's important, and everything else is up to the actor, which can be difficult for people at times, but can also be a lot of fun.
Some modern troupes don't even, like, use a scenario. They'll just hand you a paragraph that is the summary of the play, and they're like, okay, this is what we're working with. And some troupes have a significantly more fleshed out idea of what they want their scenario to be. So it really just depends on the group and what they're doing.
Yep. And then another thing that makes it a little bit easier too when it comes to the improvisation is that Commedia utilizes stock characters. So basically this means that the characters are reoccurring and the characters are of basic archetypes so that in each scenario they have the same kinds of mentalities or drives or motivations, much like sitcoms from today, things like Futurama or Friends or SpongeBob, things like that. They all have the same characters put into different situations, right? Situational comedy, sitcom, there you go.
This didn't just make it easier for the actors to learn their parts, this made it easier for the audiences to understand what was going on stage, because these stereotypes, they didn't just have recognizable personalities, they also wore the same costumes every time on stage, and they would have the same mask every time, which we'll talk more about later. But so having these stereotypes made it really easy for the scenario writers to know what was going to happen, for the actors to learn their parts, and for the audience to recognize what was going on stage.
Exactly. And since you brought it up, the next thing I'd like to talk about is masks. But here's an interesting fun fact.
So, Commedia was the first time, well, not necessarily the first time because it depends on, like, what type of theater you're talking about, but it was the largely recognized as the first time in Western theater where women were allowed on stage without a mask. And especially when women were allowed on stage and were recognized for it in a positive way. This is especially entertaining because this allowed for character roles for women where those women could be on stage unmasked. So we were able to have archetypes that didn't involve masks, like the Amorosa, which is the lover's role. Before this, men would play the women's characters, and they would play them with a quote-unquote grotesque female mask. I pulled that from a website, for the record, so the wording is not my own. To designate that they were playing a woman's role instead of a man's. So, masks and commedia was great for women liberation on stage.
Absolutely. And the reason that masks were used in the first place was basically going off of what Lady Monka said earlier, was to be able to establish a specific character. Even if the actor changed for these stock characters, they were still recognized as the original character because the mask was the same and the costuming was the same. And it also helped unify it across different troupes as well. Because if you went to see one troupe and the stock character for that troupe, let's just say Pantalone, was all in black, where another one it's all in red, it's very hard to make that connection because it's so different. But because these...
Pantalone being the old miserly father, for the record.
Yes, I'm jumping ahead, don't mind me. But being able to have these specific little things that the characters have allow for that connection to be made more easily, especially on a street performance kind of situation, before it gained renown and became more of a stage-based art form. Let's see. Because of this
also,
go ahead.
It's okay. I often see different actors playing a archetype. You would very rarely see one actor play multiple roles. Typically, during the Italian Renaissance, when commedia was at its height, somebody would, we call it specializing in a role, and then they would play that role like their entire life. The only exception to this is the Amorosa role, where people would often like age out of it in a way, and then they might move on to a different role.
Exactly.
Fun facts about the archetypes.
And then, jumping back to masks, because of that need for recognition across troops, or be able to pinpoint these specific characters as these characters, specific features were created for these masks. Every troupe had their own little variants, but there were certain things that needed to remain the same. For example, Pantalone having a very prominent nose, usually a reddish-brown kind of mask, and that kind of goes with the costuming as well. It's usually red for Pantalone. Dattore is a very specific kind of mask. It's more of a quarter mask than a half mask, like a lot of the commedia masks, which half mask and then quarter mask is just the forehead and the nose. Dattore is usually a bulbous nose with really big eyebrows that look like caterpillars sitting on his face. And then you have Arlecchino. And there's a lot of debate in a lot of research topics about how Arlecchino's mask should be made. But overall, the general consensus is that it needs to look kind of goofy and definitely not attractive. It's pretty much the summary of it. The majority of the Arlecchino masks that I personally have seen usually have some kind of wart or two on his face, and it's made to look almost cartoonesque to our standard, to give him more of like a childlike kind of look as well.
Like, the face will often be very squashed in a way, or look very pressed in.
Absolutely. Kind of pug-like, almost.
Yeah, pug is a very good word for it. Because the nose is almost always just, like, very large and round, but, like, smashed. Right. So, yeah, pug is a good word.
Yep. And then, let's see. And it, kind of going off of that, the masks were also kind of used to denote, specific characteristics about these characters in a very subtle kind of way, just along with the costuming as a whole. I mean, kind of like going with the pug-like and the childlike innocence in the Arlecchino, that's that kind of Arlecchino is usually played just like that, with childhood innocence and whimsy and wanting to learn things or wanting to eat food or whatever the case may be. And then there are other variations of Arlecchino that it changes based on what the style of mask is too. And I think that segues us into character types. So, Lady Monka talked about the Amorosa earlier. Would you like to continue to explain what the lovers or the Inamorati are?
Yeah, so the Inamorati, the lovers, the Amorosa, and the Amoroso, these are all different words to describe a set of characters, usually one male and one female, although modern troops and potentially period troops don't necessarily play to that stereotype. They are two characters who want nothing more than to be in love with each other. They have 2-3 priorities. Their first one is to be in love with themselves. They don't actually care about anybody more than they care about themselves. They're also in love with the idea of love. Like, that fairy tale wedding is the dream for them. A modern Bridezilla TV show is the epitome of what you would see Isabella on. Isabella being one of the Amorosas that we commonly use in Commedia today. And then of course, they are in love with each other. Usually the order is actually that they are in love with the idea of love, and then with themselves, and then with each other, but the important part is that you know all three of those. But of course, there has to be a conflict, and that conflict is usually that one or both of their parents has an issue with them being together for some reason. Commonly, we see them paired as Orazio and Isabella will be a pair of lovers, Flavio and Flaminia. Those are the two we use most often in Youth Commedia. Angela and what's the pairing for Angela? Virginio? Is it Virginio?
I believe so.
Yeah, so there's more there's like 100 lover names out there, but commonly we use Orazio and Isabella, and then Flaminia and Flavio. But having them mistake each other's names is a great gag for comedy. Usually you can have that their parents, one of them is Dottore, who is the doctor who doesn't actually know anything. Wow, I just lost all of my knowledge of Commedia for 30 seconds. Or one of their parents will be Pantalone, who is the miserly old man who wants nothing more than to get money. And for one reason or another, they'll be like, no, you two can't marry each other. And the whole plot of the show, even if like there is actually another plot that has nothing to do with the lovers, the only plot the lovers will think about is their own plot. What the external conflict is, what Dottore or Pantalone is saying is the reason why they can't get married. So there may be another complete plot going on that has nothing to do with why the lovers can't get married, but the reason the lovers can't get married will be the only thing that concerns them.
Exactly. And as you mentioned,
that's pretty much their characters. They're very naive, very simplistic, very dumb, usually. They're not very smart characters.
It's the young and dumb kind of idea. A lot of people often compare them to Romeo and Juliet, which is one of my favorite comparisons to make for it, just because of the mentality that you can see. There's a strong comparison between the two groupings. And a quick fun fact, actually, about the name Isabella, it was not originally used as a lover's name until Isabella Andrini, who was one of the most famous female Commedia players, having her own troupe, I Gelosi. Fun facts. And then, as Lady Monka mentioned, Pantalone and Dottore, they're actually our next section, which is the Vecchi, which means old men. So thank you for the segue.
You're welcome. It was cleverly crafted.
Yes, absolutely.
Cleverly crafted. I can't talk, guys. I'm so sorry.
That's perfectly okay. The Vecchi are classified as the old men. Most of the time, they are considered more of a higher social rank, usually used as parents, as Lady Monka mentioned, but they're usually well established. Like, people know who these people are. Dottore usually known for some kind of whether it be medicine or philosophy or something to that effect. Dottore is the epitome of the old man who talks to listen to himself talk and feel better about himself because he knows so much when he learned everything from a YouTube video kind of mentality. And then Pantalone, is basically Scrooge from Christmas Carol. That's the easiest comparison that I can make to make sense of it. Very always focused on money, investments, whatever the case may be. So a lot of the conflict when Pantalone is involved is monetary based. So it could be a bride price, which is why the daughter has to get married to somebody specific rather than the one that she wants to marry, or whatever the case may be.
Orazio isn't rich enough to marry Isabella.
Right, exactly. And then that brings us to the last category, which are the Zani and the Cervetas.
Do you have Capitano under Becky?
I have Capitano in his own category, so we'll get there.
Okay.
So the Zani and Cervetas are the servant class, which is the largest grouping of Commedia characters. While the lovers may have a lot of different names for them, they're still the same kind of character, no matter what the name may be. They might vary a little bit in intelligence level, but they're still classified as a lover. The Zani and Cervetas have very, very distinct personalities, and all have all different motivations and everything too. Four of the ones we use the most actually are Arlecchino, Brigella, Columbina, and Pedrolino. So we already talked a little bit about Arlecchino being, he can be childish and goofy and all of that. And that's usually the Arlecchino we end up going with because it's a lot of fun to play with. And Arlecchino is also usually a tumbler. Very, very physical role.
We can't teach you guys how to do a pratfall over Zoom, so please use caution if you try anything at home. We claim no responsibility.
Yes, extremely important.
Parent discretion advised.
Yes.
I don't know what the legal terminology is.
But Arlecchino is usually driven by very basic urges, like, I really need to eat right now, so what am I going to do to make that happen? Very one-track mind. And then you have Brigella. Brigella can either be a servant or can be a man of his own devices. It depends on the scenario.
A scoundrel for hire.
Right, exactly. His intelligence and ability to con people is entirely based on a scenario. Most of the time, he's kind of an idiot and really terrible at his job. Sometimes Brigella's a little bit smarter than the other people around him, which gives him an advantage. But when Brigella's in a scenario, the majority of the time it makes him the villain of the scenario. Because he's trying to scheme some way, whether it be to get money, to get renown, to get food, to get one over the guy, whatever the case may be.
You kind of have to treat Brigella like a genie, where like any service you contract him for is going to be taken either totally literally or totally out of context, and you have no idea what the result is going to be. So
exactly.
It's always an interesting scenario.
That is a very good way to put that. That's exactly what it is. Because he will take one misplaced word and turn that into his way to mess with you to the end of time. And then we have Columbina. Would you like to talk about Columbina?
Oh, we love Columbina. Columbina is one of mine and Lady Kale's favorite roles to play. And we never get to, so...
Oh.
Columbina is the, like, if you know the term Deus Ex Machina, when in Greek plays a god gets sent in at the very end of a play to fix everything, Columbina is the Deus Ex Machina of Commedia. She's the sassy, she's usually a sassy servant. She's always a servant, but she's usually a servant to the amorosa of the show. She's almost always assigned to the female lover. And if she's not, she's much snarkier and sassier than if she were assigned to the female lover. She often has some kind of relationship with Arlecchino as well, even if it is just a relationship as, like, being servants in opposite households. But Columbina is absolutely the fixer of the scenario if she's in it. She will be the one to come in and be like, well, okay, what's wrong? And she'll help sort things out. She's also the perpetuator of bad ideas. So before she gets to the point of fixing everything, she can also be the one who causes a lot of chaos. So if Isabella really wants to see Orazio, Columbina will help Isabella dress up as a man to sneak out of the house, and things go awry from there. So Columbina can be a very chaotic character, but she's also a very good character. So we love Columbina.
Oh, yes. She can be played in so many ways. I've actually seen some scenarios where she was taken on as Brigilla's assistant, which is probably one of my favorite ways to play Columbina, because she is a very intelligent servant. So she is able to fix some of Brigilla's less intelligent schemes so that they can actually work. And then the last one that I want to talk about from the Zani and Servetta category is Pedrolino. Pedrolino can be played in multiple ways, but for the most part, he's usually a little bit more intelligent of the servants, and he's usually categorized by an oversized white shirt, kind of like what I'm wearing. Extra long, which I don't have. I tried. But he's usually very kind. He's trying to help the situation. If Columbina is being played in the same scenario as Pedrolino, and she is a good character, they oftentimes team together to make some kind of arrangement to fix what's going on. So he's kind of the addition to the male version of the Columbina, just way, way nicer.
Columbina is chaotic good, Pedrolino is lawful good.
Exactly. And then the last character I want to talk about is Capitano. Now, I don't put Capitano into a specific category because he can be played as literally any of those three that we talked about. He can be played as a lover, he can be played as an old man who's trying to buy a younger bride, he can be played as a servant to somebody else, a hired hand kind of situation. There are too many ways to be able to play this particular character to lump him into one category.
Although I will warn you that if you try to do more research, Capitano is usually categorized as a Vecchi in most books and on most websites.
Yes, and that is, I have found that too. But there are one or two resources, and and in more modern versions of Commedia, Capitano has become a lot more
versatile.
Exactly. But Capitano is a Spanish captain who is the biggest braggart to exist. He is usually a coward or a liar or just some way exaggerating everything about himself. He usually has an extremely long name, and the reason that the Capitano is kind of the biggest comedic character out of this grouping is because of the rivalry between Spain and Italy at the time. They used him as a mockery for it. Capitanos usually dressed to the 10s instead of the 9s. He's way over the top, especially in comparison to everybody else on the stage. The mask is usually an extremely long nose. Usually a terrible Spanish accent goes with it. Honestly, to me, the worse the accent, the better. And it adds to that comedic value. But though he is mostly considered a Vecchi, he can be played in the other categories as well. So I think that about sums up everything that we wanted to talk about today for this particular video. But I have to warn you, because things have changed for the online setting, you now have homework. So, that being said, in the workbook that I provided for everybody on the Google Classrooms, at the end of each handout there's going to be an assignment that I'm going to have due for the next day. They are not going to be overbearing. At most, it's going to be a paragraph. I will not kill you with this, I promise. But there is an assignment at the end of the Introduction to Commedia handout for you to finish for tomorrow. All right? And with that, I think it's time to bid you adieu for the night.